Okay, this is a Sicha what the Rebbe said. You must probably have heard about the Sicha. This was a Sicha what the Rebbe said this in Tafshin Mem Aleph when it was the Rebbe Rashab's 120th birthday. It was the 20th of Marcheshvan, Tafshin Mem Aleph. The Rebbe Rashab was born in Tafresh Chaf Aleph, so therefore it makes it 120 years. And the Rebbe speaks about the significance and the importance of marking the 120 years. And especially, a lot of things have to do with our situation right now, what we are actually going through, because it actually talks in the Sicha about troubles in the world. And as Simcha mentioned, there was in Afghanistan, and the Rebbe speaks about the importance of Simcha, and he on this based on the Kapitel, the new Kapitel of the Rebbe, which was the Rebbe Rashab, Kapitel Kuf Chaf 21. So after the Rebbe said a mimer, it says as follows: it's known the story about the one whose birthday it was. In other words, the Rebbe Rashab's birthday was that Chav Cheshvan. That Kveitus Admish Rashab Eden, Shesipper Kveitus Meircham Admor, that the Friedige Rebbe told over, the Rebbe calls him my father-in-law, every year on his birthday, Hoya Amur, Kveitus Admar Rashab Eden Eimer Dach. The Rebbe Rashab would say Chassidus, a Maimer Chassidus, every year on his birthday. Elo Shahaya B'Chashoy. It was something done in a quiet manner. The Rebbe Rashab only said this mimer for his only son, the Friedige Rebbe. And at a later date, Pearson Zois Benoim son that took his place, and all of the Rebbe made this well known. Until from this became the entire idea of celebrating in a way well known. In other words, thanks to the way the Rebbe Rashab in private celebrated his birthday, and following that, the Friedige Rebbe went ahead and made this well known. So this became the basis for the entire idea of the celebration of a birthday. Even though that up until the time when the Friedige Rebbe made this well known, this was something that was done quietly. And by some and many, this wasn't even quietly done. In other words, it wasn't even done at all. The idea of celebrating, marking the birthday in any manner. Since the Friedige this is the Shaykh La'achre Pearson said that this is applicable after making this well known. To each and every one, that the awareness and the knowledge of this reached him. In other words, since everything is by Hashgacha Pratis, and since by Hashgacha Pratis, now I found out something about Yom Haledes that I didn't know about beforehand. So that itself tells me that this is something that meant for me. Hashgacha Pratis made sure that I found out about it. So therefore, this idea is meant for me. Afterwards, especially since afterwards the Gamnasa this also became a directive of the Friedige Rebbe, my father-in-law, that we have in today's Hayom Yom. That the Hayom Yom essentially is the Rebbe's collections from different letters, sichos, mamarim of the Friedige Rebbe on different topics. So the Hayom Yom Yerval Nissen says, quote, this Allah Adam is boided v'chulu, that it's on a person has to take some time to be private and to think about what's doing with himself and add in tshuva. Become more like it's already printed in many places from a note of my father-in-law. So in other words, the idea that we have this well known and have this already a lesson. So this is even more something that obligates us and makes it something that we need to do, not just because we heard about it, but we were told to do it. Concerning the one whose birthday is on the 20th of Marcheshvan. The Frierdiker Rebbe emphasized and that we said before that it was customary for him to recite a Maimer Chassidus. And concerning this minig itself, that his father, the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, had the custom to recite a Maimer Chassidus, his galach, another detail was revealed as well. Bein hamamorim shenemru bekesher imchof marcheshvan v'isparsmu yachad im aschol shalom, amongst the mamorim that in connection with the 20th of March, and they became known together with the introductions. And the Rebbe says not all mamorim did we know the opening pasuk of the Maimer. It's only the topic itself without the opening pasuk. But in those connected with the 20th of Marcheshvan that begin with an opening pasuk, royim shebekama mamorim hascholos keshudas lepeirik tehillim shemasim lemisper shnoisav shbayim eledas haramish masayim. We see that in many of those mamorim that were said in connection with the 20th of Marcheshvan, the beginning of the mamorim are connected with that particular Peirik Tehillim that corresponds to the age, to that new year of the one who had the birthday, the Rebbe Rashab. This is based on the minig that one received from the Baal Shem Tov. And we know this also Kapitel Tehillim Amasper Misprashnoisav, that a person recite daily that's appropriate and to how old he is. This means to say, if a person becomes, for example, 13 years old, bar mitzvah, he begins to say chapter 14. Similarly to the years following that. So the same thing in the Rebbe Rashab's Mamorim connected with the 20th of Cheshvan. Many times we see that the title of the Maimer was something, a pasuk from that particular chapter in Tehillim. The Ayin the Rebbe says, "Nois Dalo." This idea, Shayach Loy Rakasher Neshama Shabal Yom Eledus says, "Kan Lamata Beguf." Not only when the neshama of the one whose birthday was is found down here in the body, like we spoke about it at another. The Rebbe spoke about it. Even when the neshama finds itself above in the world of truth, Yeshla Aliyah Bashanim Lefi Hazman Kan Lamata. It ascends in the years, in other words, according to whatever new year, according to the date down here below. From when the Rebbe says, a very obvious question, but seemingly, what does it matter for the neshama above? Down here below, another year passed. Afal became roim. Still on all we see. That the Frierdiker Rebbe related an interesting anecdote on the Frierdiker Rebbe's notes and writings from the 20th of Marcheshvan, and this was way after the Rebbe Rashab passed away. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes that this was in the year Shnas Tafshin Hey, 1945, or actually Chav Cheshvan, 1944. His father, the Rashab, appeared to him in a dream. So again, this dream took place 25 years after the Rebbe Rashab already passed away. Almost 25 years. But Omar and the Rebbe told his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe, in this 24-hour period, that it was completed. I passed by already 84 years from when my neshama descended in this world down here below. In kol echad mikvoitushes Rabbeinu Ariseinu Hagadoshim yoy pasuk the Kapitel Pei Daled. Every single one of the Rabbeim and our forefathers is going to say a mimer on a certain pasuk of chapter 84. So we see this idea that even after the passing, from this we see, even after the passing of the Rebbe Rashab, and the neshama is found above, it becomes increased according to the number of years passed by down here below. To such a degree of import, number oz till the then said, Katra neshama is above. He's not saying the old Perek has to do with the previous year, but rather he is saying the Tehillim hakashur lemisper shnois of Oz, according to the mispar, the number of the years that was then. In other words, in the previous year. But rather they said the Mamorim, the Kapitel Tehillim of this year, it's for the number of years in this year. So now the Rebbe brings out, going back to the present Fabrengen, with the Rebbe Fabrengen in Tafshin Mem Aleph. So he says, comes out, that in the 20th Marcheshvan of this year, Tafshin Mem Aleph, where Ray passed by 120 years from the Rebbe Rashab's birthday in Tafresh Chaf Aleph. He was born in the 20th of Marcheshvan, the year called the crown in Aramaic, Tafresh Chaf Aleph. Let's skip over to the next line. We begin in the 120th year now. This recite Kapitel 121 in Tehillim. Shir Amay. It's a song of ascents. I will raise up my eyes to the mountain, etc., to the mountains. So the Rebbe goes on and says, we can connect what was spoken about previously in the Maimer. The Rebbe said at the beginning of the Fabrengen is based on a Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab. Over there in that Maimer, we've studied this Maimer before, where the Rebbe speaks about the three levels. He speaks about how Chava had a problem and how Noach had a problem. Both of them were involved with grapes and wine. And Sarah descended and went up. They had the grapes. They tried to do with Simcha, and their Simcha didn't work out. But with Sarah, her Simcha was in the ultimate way. Ad kedei kach, to such a degree, since every single Yid has the level of bittul. He has it as an inheritance from his forefathers. Therefore, the joy is a complete joy that is good, that is a perfect joy that Chava and Noach tried to get and they messed up with, that they have the level of joy that's by Sarah Imeinu. Again, that's in a separate mimer that we studied on other occasions. Like it's explained at length in the mimer of the Rebbe Rashab that talks about it. Also in an explanation called Nirali that was actually printed afterwards, skip the parentheses, Im Hadgasha Nesefes Oides Inyan Asimcha, with an additional emphasis about the idea of joy. The Rebbe continues. The main thing is Hareza Maisa Poil. The main thing is the action and actuality. Since action is what's primary, that there should actually be the idea of joy in actuality. The way we're demanding in already in Tafshin Mem Aleph, that I've been saying that this is already the latter. This is already lately we've been talking about joy. So the Rebbe says a very basic arises. We demand and we say that the idea of joy is something that this time, it's necessary for this time, it's important in this time. There has to be the idea of joy. Not just the joy of performing a mitzvah in the simple sense. Not only the joy, that has to be even more so when a person is studying Torah. The laws of Hashem are straight, they make the heart rejoice. The laws of Hashem, the idea of Alagam Simcha v'Masecha. There has to be also joy in your act. You will be also as a promise. The Abishah promises that all of our actions will be for the sake of heaven. And the joy has to be also in your ways. Then all your ways, so it's not just limited it's not just limited to performing mitzvahs, but really day of a Yid, all for Hashem, because every action has to be for the sake of heaven, and all your ways you should know Him. And all those things that I do, I need to find joy in. Alongside with this, we say one of the reasons for the idea of Simcha, that the time is an auspicious time for joy. What does that mean? Since the world finds itself in a shocking situation with all the details about this, like I mentioned, the war in Afghanistan, as much we'll talk about how terrible and how awful and how shocking the situation is, this is still insufficient. It doesn't really it's only a tip of the iceberg of how terrible things is. We only know some of the shocking things that are going on. In other words, we're not privy to what's going on behind the scenes and all the infighting going on between the free country and so on. And the Rebbe says the motivation why we have to be besimcha himself. This seems to be contradictory. On one hand, we say that this is a shocking situation. Like the pasuk says, darkness covers the earth. When it says that it covers the earth, that itself is a shocking expression. And afterwards, a bit of how bad it is. We say them even more to the nations. When we talk about our Rafel, is an expression Lashon Kodesh that shows even greater, a stronger darkness than darkness. Havare, we know, we don't rely on miracles. We need to affect natural means. So in other words, we need to be cognizant of the situation in the world, and we need to take that into consideration about our decisions and so on. And on the other hand, we say, along with how terrible and shocking the situation in the world is, such as a yiga, it's prohibited that it should touch or yima'et, or it should lessen, or it shouldn't even weaken the joy. It shouldn't weaken the joy of a mitzvah. It shouldn't including also the joy and in your service. I will try to, if I put in my earbuds, if you'll be able to hear me better. Do you hear me better now that I put in my earbuds? Is it better? Is it
worse? You sound louder, and there was some static before every so often, but now it's louder.
Okay. I was debating whether to put these in or not. Okay. The Adra, the last line, just the opposite that Rebbe says. Not only does the darkness of the world, the shocking state of the world, is it not supposed to weaken in any way our joy, even the joy of mundane matters, but from this very darkness of the ghost, that the darkness covers the land. There has to be the additional light and the increase of light that comes out of the darkness. This is also connected with can't even see this. In Yisur Nachacham and Asichlos, with the idea that says over there in the pasuk that the advantage of wisdom is out of foolishness, in other words, kedusha out of klippa. Or bedugmas machakasav b'zoyar. This is similar to what it says in the Zoyar Mevur b'Maimer Nam Lebalayim Ledas, and it's explained in the above mentioned Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab in the Geil L'Sara concerning Sara. Shaydeizer she'asis Sara v'Nochsus, through Sara coming and descending into Mitzrayim. Nifal ba'ha'inim v'salkas, it was affected in Sarah the idea of rising up. Aliyah legamri shloi ba'erech, an ascent that's incomparably higher than she was before she even descended into Mitzrayim. Moving down the Pashas Maklala Yadua, this is simply understood from the famous rule, that the descent is the sake of an ascent. Moving from this understood, since the descent was in the most despicable place in the land. Therefore, since it was such a low descent, so the ascent after this was incomparably higher. And so too, it's also in our situation. The fact that darkness covers the earth, and a stronger darkness the nations. Till everybody sees with their own eyes of flesh, and all agree that there was never such a terrible or such a situation. The Rebbe always says positively, surely everything will progress in the positive and the good way. So the very fact that we see such darkness, there has to be the additional and extra and excess light that comes out of the darkness. The additional and increase of joy just because of an out of the darkness. But we demand that as long as the darkness covers the earth and the very strong darkness covers the nations, should already then be the Simcha. In other words, it's not just we're looking forward to that when the situation will resolve. So out of this terrible darkness, then once the situation will resolve, it will be an amazing light. We're saying no. We want that it should be at the very time of the darkness, it should already be joy that comes out of that darkness. Simcha, the Simcha k'vich Torah's emes dereshes ois. And we want to joy the way the Torah of truth searches and demands for this. So it's a meta Simcha amitis. This means a true joy. I've mentioned this many shiurim that Alter Rebbe and Tanya often uses the appellation emes. Whether he's talking about loving Hashem or loving another Yid, or he's talking about being joyous, the Alter Rebbe always emphasizes the idea that this is something that has to be true, because Torah is true, and Torah is not going to ask of us something that is untrue. Torah is only going to ask of us something that's true. So therefore, when the Torah says, through the Rebbe's explanation, that when it's dark upon the earth, in that darkness itself, one needs to rejoice. It can't be a fake rejoicing. It has to be a true rejoicing. And the Rebbe gives an example. Not that he pinches his cheeks, in other words, to make, his cheeks look red, so he looks like he's happy. And he says, he says to himself, since we have to be happy, he decides that he's going to be besimcha, which is really not real to him. Rather, he will be now in a true, complete joy in actuality. Because if he only decides, so then the matter is already affected through a good thought. That since a good thought, Hashem already connects it to action, that's considered as if he did. But the Rebbe says that's not enough. This is only that he adds it to the action that he will do later on. Like Tanya explains what the meaning of mitzarfet means. He combines it, he connects the feeling with the action that he's going to do later on. And the Rebbe says, so that's not enough. All of this does not touch the idea that he has to do the action, mamish and actuality. Therefore, now he has to be happy. An actual true joy. We say, this is applicable to every single person, that this topic of chassidus reached them, that you have to be besimcha, the very hashgacha pratis. If I heard about it, that means it was meant for me to apply. Like it said in the chassidus of the Frierdiker Rebbe, he filled the place of the Rebbe Rashab, the one whose birthday it was, Besigna Kazeh, of Besigna Shoina. Either he said it in this way of expressing like the Rebbe expressed it himself, or he expressed it in a different way. But the content of it is the same, that one needs to be joyous regardless. Like the well-known teaching of the Marcheshvan. Since this person heard about this, so then there's a specific directive and lesson that he needs to derive from this in his service and actuality to his maker. So now the question is, after all that the Rebbe said that we must be joyous, and specifically the fact that it's dark, that itself is the reason why we have to be joyous, how does it fit with the darkness? So when Gambri moving this entirely not understood, how is it possible to be two opposites? We say that the darkness covers the earth, and a strong darkness the nation. The and a double and quadruple darkness of the exile, and in a shocking manner. Along with this, we demand for him to be in a true joy, like I said before. For this, there's a reply and an answer from the chapter 121 of Tehillim. Sefer Tehillim Nemar Aydei David HaMelech Shenikra Ne'im Zmiris Yisrael. That's called the pleasant singer of the Yidden. Beglal Shumanim Zmiris Seyam Shal Yisrael. He makes pleasing the songs of the Yidden. U'amar Zmiris Kol Echad Ve'echad Yisrael. He said songs in the name of every single Yid. In other words, when David HaMelech said what he said in Kapitel Tehillim Kuf Kaf Aleph, so what he said causes or evokes within every Yid and empowers every single Yid, because David HaMelech is speaking on behalf of every Yid. Maybe if I speak lower, it won't echo that strong. Let me know. There's no contradiction whatsoever between the darkness covering the land and the strong darkness, the nations, and along with the darkness, one needs to be in a state of joy. When is it possible that the darkness covering the earth and the strong darkness will cover the nations? How can that disturb him from his joy? So that's before he looks and examines. That's before he knows what's written in chapter 121 and Tehillim. But once he knows already what it says in chapter 121, he said, will not disturb him. And the Rebbe is going to explain why. What is it in Kuf Kaf Aleph? Mizmor Kuf Kaf Aleph, the Tehillim Maskil, the 121st chapter of Tehillim begins. Shiloh Miles Esayin Al-Harm, like we said before. May Ayin Yavai Ezi. From where will my assistance come? So the Rebbe says,
The explanation of this is, Loish is a tmiya v'shayla v'kiyotz b'zeh. It's not that David HaMelech has a wonder, and the Yidden, they speak on their behalf, have a question, etc. From where my assistance will come. Rather, it's a statement, not a question. This is a clear notification. From where does the assistance of a Yid come? The assistance of a Yid, Ezri, my assistance, reaches from the level of May Ayin. What is May Ayin? May Ayin, by the way, I heard somebody say, Ayin is Yud Aleph Nissen. Aleph Yud, and Nun stands for Nissen. May Ayin Gematria Me'av Echad. It's 101. This is the numerical equivalent. There's a kosher and kol hamayla sheyeshman b'me'av echad k'mevor to the Torah that's connected with all the different advantages of 101, like it's explained to the Torah. 100 is the perfect number because it's 10, the way it has not a further 10, and 101 means you're going beyond, above and beyond any type of boundary and limitation and so on. The kasher zois the moran shel b'sein asiyenu gam ma'amar chazal hayidua ein mazel Yisrael. They also connect this with the Mamorim of the Rabbeim that says that they explain the Ma'amar Chazal, that Chazal say there is no mazel for the Yidden. So Chassidus explains it doesn't mean that the Yidden don't have a mazel. But Ayin, the Ayin, the level is completely above and beyond, like we're soon going to explain, is the mazel for the Yidden. That is where Yidden get their influence. Mazel's from the word noizel. That it drips, it runs down. That the Ayin, which is totally above and beyond our grasp, that's why it's called Ayin, like the creation of Yeshma Ayin, like the number 101, which is completely above and beyond. That is the source. That's where the energy that the Yidden get their energy from. That's the Ayin Yovi Ezra. It's a statement. My assistance comes from Ayin, from that's totally above everything. It's similar to what we read and we studied. And the Torah during Simcha's Torah, this is it's not so long ago. It's less than a month from Simcha's Torah. So the Rebbe says that we learned in Parshas Zoysa Bracha on Simcha's Torah that Yisrael will sit sure and confident. He will be alone, will be the image of Yaakov, meaning he doesn't need any protection. Not only because Yisrael sits alone in confidence, one doesn't have to overthink things and one doesn't have to fear things. Rather, the way it is immediately, he continues right afterwards, when we conclude the Torah, we say, you are fortunate, Yisrael. Yehudim smeichim oidyois, that Yidden rejoice even more. Ad lo'ifin shel tainum, till a type of rejoicing that's in a delight way, in an enjoyable way. Shezeu apir shel ashrecha, that's the meaning of ashrecha from the word oisher. Oisher means delight and enjoyment. Beglal sha'Yehudim hinam am noisha b'Hashem, since the Yidden are a nation that is saved by Hashem. He is the shield of your assistance. Like we say, may Ayin Yovei Ezri, we're talking about the assistance of Hashem. And after this, that you will stand upon the heights of those enemies that are been challenged by you. In Kol like the entire tumult about this, we should move in Torah. Like it's understood from the commentaries of the Torah and that pasuk, also the simple meaning of the matter is also understood, is sufficient. So let's skip down to 3 paragraphs on the bottom by Yud Aleph. When we spoke about before, this is the beginning of chapter 121. That the simple assistance of a Yid reaches and comes down initially from the Ayin. That's where his assistance comes from. Tzaddik means, but it has to be Shamazel lo yirak b'dekei ashvi, that the mazel should not just remain in the seventh heaven. Lo yirak b'mazel sheb'neshama, it shouldn't just remain in that level of the neshama that's called mazel. Lo yirak b'yichida sheb'neshama, not only in the yichida of the neshama. El sheyiyeh etzleinu b'toiv hanirav hanigla, it should be by us in a visible, revealed good. Sheyiyeh itzarcha toiv lanu tiftach, that should be your good treasure open up for us, meaning even though it's your treasure, it has to come down low. It has to come down to our world. And like the Rebbe always uses the expression, below 10 hundredths. And immediately continues in the second pasuk of Hamizmar Tehillim, where it says in this chapter 121, this pasuk that says that my assistance is from Havaya, from Hashem, that makes heavens and earth, indicates that the Ayin Yahweh Ezri of the previous pasuk is not something that remains above, but actually permeates our world. Ha'ezer Ezri, the level of the assistance, my help. One second. Nimshak me'ayin. Comes from the Ayin, Medargin, Laila, Yosem, Hashem Havaya, comes from the much higher level, even beyond Shem Yudkei Vavkei, place Itras B'Shem, place Shamas B'Shem, Yosem, Koitz, a cloud that's not grasped by any name, it's not hinted by any letter or any point on top of a letter. But La'achri, Shenifala, Ezri, after my assistance was affected by coming from the Ayin, which is beyond any names, Miyad Nimshak B'Hashem, Yosem, Shemayim, V'Odes. From there, it immediately comes down into the Hashem that makes heavens and earth. Which is a koilo, a skull, seder, ishtalfos, ad, elam haza, atak, shetaklam, atem, and it includes the entire chain order of descent until this low world that there's nothing beneath it. Afterwards, kasher ezri magia lamato elam haza, atak, shetaklam, atem, and when the assistance reaches down here below, in this low world that there's nothing beneath it, tzrichim arei shmirim yechedes, we need a special type of protection. We do not need to have this protection in the worlds that are higher than this, even and not in the spiritual world of action. In other words, this, once it comes down into our physical world, there are things that can ruin it. And you don't have to be scared of it in so much in the spiritual worlds. Even in the world of Asiya, the way it's still spiritual. It's only in our physical world of Asiya we have to be concerned. Therefore, he continues later in the Kapitel Tehillim of Kufchaf Aleph. That it reaches down here into this low world, a unique protection. Behold, he will not slumber, he will not sleep, the guardian of Yisrael. Since a person knows about themselves, that they also have those things that, like we say on Musaf and Shabbos, was the reason why we were exiled from our land. Because then, those things that caused them to be exiled, he is considered asleep from mitzvahs. But we know that when a Yid Chas v'Sholom is asleep from the mitzvahs, so that causes correspondingly a sleep by Hashem above. Despite that, the Rebbe says, we say, it has no connection with the fact that the guardian of Yisrael will not slumber, will not sleep. It reaches in such a level that's called the open eye, the eye that never shuts, the eye that's always watching. That level is so high that the idea of sleep is not applicable, like it says in Zohar, it's explained in Chassidus, regardless of what we may do down here. Like we've spoken about before, it reaches from the level of Ayin. It's a cloud, it's a level that's beyond any name and beyond any letter and beyond any point on top of a letter. It's a level that Ayin is higher even than Shem Yudkei Vavkei. Allah is Kama V'Kama, which is a Nile Yosem, and which is a Bar Chaka B'Yisrael V'Oretz. it's so much higher than the way it comes afterwards in the heavens and the earth. The shame is there, Hadargi Shal Ein B'Kicha, and the Sham, Zadargi Shal Ein B'Kicha over there, that's the level of the open eye, the watchful eye, Sham Chatchila L'Shayach Kol Inen Hashena, over there, there's the entire idea of sleeping doesn't apply. And let's skip over oops, went off the right page. Oops, still the wrong page. Sorry about that. So he says, Shalachein, like three, skip over 2 paragraphs. Shalachein afilu kishu yardim b'elam haza tachton, even when we descend to this low world, she'ein lamata menu abira amikta, that there's nothing lower than it than this deep pit. Abira amikta gufa b'ayim la'oidin built to the tzuyim, and in this deep pit, which the world is called, we come to even other unwanted things. Avul davar barur vadai v'avtacha gemura. It is a clear thing and a sure promise. Advadois gemura, till a complete surety and verity, shlayanav yitlaishan shem Yisrael, that the garden of Yisrael will not sleep. And kol hapratim is and all the details of this. Like it's explained in the psukim that are following this. And then the Rebbe goes on and says that this is applicable regardless of who learns this. Could be from the greatest to the least familiar, and so on. Could still have both opposites, and should come down into this idea that should permeate our world. Let's go to, I skipped over a page, to Tazayin, Valderach Zagam Ben Lino Didam Ben Gelin Simcha, so too also concerning the idea of joy. Shabazay Yesham Sheikh Savas Hafrim, and this there are 2 extremes. Yehudi Yedea Yid knows that in the world the darkness covers the land, and the strong darkness the nations. But along with this, he knows that the Yid has to be the one to repair this. Because a Yid's job is also to repair the world. And it's incumbent upon him to also illuminate the activities of the Goyim in the world. And then he goes on and says the whole idea that the Rambam rules that a Yid has to be the one to impress on about the non-Jew, that the reason why he's doing the mitzvahs to Shem Noach is because this is what was commanded on Har Sinai. Let's skip to the last paragraph. Amongst all the different ideas to be able to fix up the darkness that covers the earth and the strong darkness of nations, to the great wonder, they tried all types of paths. But to use the path of joy, that through that we will break through the boundaries of the exiles, and it's only done by individuals, or this was done quietly, or mizman was man, or from time to time. So the Rebbe says, we have to bring a lot of noise to the world, make a lot of tumult, and to extract the world from its exile. This comes from the fact that the person extracts himself from his inner galus. What is the advice for a person to get out of his own galus? That's Aideshu b'simcha shesimcha pereskal agdarim gamaskidi agolus. It's through the joy, through the simcha, breaking through all the boundaries. Gamaskidi agolus, also the boundaries of the galus. So he says, and then he continues. He says, "V'adrab," just before Yudches, kasher avodas Hashem b'simcha tu'levav, when the servants of Hashem is with joy and gladness of heart. Muftach, he's assured that your enemies will be denied to you, which is a b'diak it's the opposite of what happens when a person doesn't have joy. So the joy causes the nations of the world not to be able to do anything further to